Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we'll be building a 5-point GP calculator with JavaScript. I will first of all show you how the application will look and how it works. Then after that we'll start coding. We have course code, unit load and grade. So when a student or a user select adds a course code EC201, then select or gives the unit load, let's say 2, and select the grade A. When the add button is clicked, a table is being populated with the value being inserted by the user or student. The course code is 201, unit load is 2, and grade is A. I'll go ahead and add more courses to this. I've added some bunch of random course code, unit load and grade. So when the calculate button is clicked, it prints the total unit load and also the CGPA. As you can see, it says your total unit load is 16 and your current CGPA is 4.31. Then when the clear button is clicked, it clears everything, so you can do another calculation. So the next thing I have to do is to start coding. I have created a new folder for this project. For now, it has only one file, which is the modifier bootstrap. I'll be using bootstrap in this project for easy styling. Then I'll go ahead and create the files which we will need for this project in this root directory GP calculator. And also I've added the link to my GitHub in the description box below. I'll uploaded this project to my GitHub, so you can go to my GitHub and clone the project. Okay, let's start by adding the first file, which is index.html. Add the second one, the style sheet, call it styles.css. Then the last but not the least, add main.js. We'll start with the index.html. I'm using Visual Studio Code for this project. So if you type exclamation tab, you get the HTML boilerplate. So I'll change the title to GP calculator. Then I'll have a div with class, call it wrapper. This is going to be the general container of this file. So in this wrapper, I'll have a h1, call it GP calculator. I'll go ahead and link my style sheet and the JavaScript. I've linked the styles which I'll be using. The first one is Bootstrap Unified and the second one is my style sheet, and also with the JavaScript. So let's continue. Then after this h1, I'll have a form row with 4 columns. So let's give it a class of form-row. In this, I'll create a div, give it a class, and it will be 4 columns. In the first one, I'll have an input with ID, call it course code, course-code. Give it a class form control with type text. Then I'll give it a placeholder course code. So I'll go ahead and copy this and paste it here. So in this one, the placeholder is going to be unit load. Then instead of text, it will be a number. Give it ID of unit load. Then I would like to set the minimum value 1 and max 15. Then after this, I'll create a drop down. So select, give it ID, grade, then give it a class of form control. Under this select, the first one is grade with no value. Then remember, we are creating a 5-point GP calculator. So the value of A is 5, B is 4, C is 3, D is 2, 1 is E, and 0 is F. So after that, in the last column, I would like to have a button. Call it input type. Okay, let's give it an ID first. ID add. It will be of with class btn dash primary. Then it will be a type. The type will be type button, and the value is going to be add. Next, I'll create a table. I created a table with ID table, then gave it some bootstrap classes, which is table is going to be bordered, and I gave it a display none, which is going to be a class I will create later when I'm setting up my styles.css. Then I want the table to be hidden by default when the page loads, so that's why I gave it a class of display none. Then the table is going to have 3 columns. The first one is going to be course code, unit load, and grade. Then the T body, which is the table body, I gave it the ID of T body and also created a T foot with ID T foot. The table by default is going to be empty, so the content is going to be dynamically added when the user clicks on the add button. So for now, the table is going to be empty. Next, I'll create a row with 2 columns. So div row. I'll copy this and paste. So in the first one, I'll have an input with ID. Let's call it calculate GP. I'll give it some bootstrap class btn dash success, and it's going to be it's going to be hidden by default, so I'll give it a display none. The type is going to be button, and the value is going to be calculate GP. I'll copy this and paste it here. So in this one, the value is going to be clear. It will be a type button. Then instead of button success, let's give it button warning. Then the ID is going to be clear. So next, I will set up the style sheet. In the size of CSS, I've done some styling. The body, I gave it a dark background and a white color. Then the wrapper, I gave it a maximum width of 90 and set up the margin. The H1, I made it to be center aligned and gave it a margin of 30 pixels. The table, I gave it a margin top of 30 pixels. The display none is I set it to display none. The next thing we're going to look at is the JavaScript, so right now this is how the page looks like. the course code, unit load and grade, then the add button. When the add button is clicked, nothing is being done, so nothing is happening. So let's add some functionality to this add button. We say const add equals to document the query selector. Okay, select. We'll grab hold of the element with the ID of add, which is this input, this button right here with ID add. So in the JavaScript, we need to attach an event handler to this button. So we'll say add event listener. It's going to be a click event, so we'll say click, and it takes in a callback function. So let's create an arrow function. In this, let's first of all do console log to check if the button is actually working. Let's say add. As you can see, the add is being printed, so the button is actually working. So when a user or a student enters a value here, and also the unit load and the grade, when the add button is clicked, it's being appended to the table body, which we set the table to be hidden by default. And when the add button is clicked and the value is appended, we'll set the table to be visible. So we need to get hold of the course code, the unit load and the grade. I'll copy this. So the first one, let's call it course code. Then query selector, course code. We are selecting the input with ID course code. This input with the ID course code, that's what we are selecting, the element. Then next we select the unit load. Then after this we get the grade. When the add button is clicked, we need to append a row to the table body. So first start by creating a row. So call it const tr, which is document dot create element. The element we are creating is tr. Then after this, you need to create 3 columns, and this table row is going to contain 3 columns, which is going to be the value obtained from the inputs of the course code, unit load and grade. So let's create another constant. Let's call it td course code. Let's say document dot create element is going to be td. Let's copy this one. We'll change this one to unit load. We change this one to grade. So let's start with the first one. The value in this is going to be the value of whatever the user entered in the course code. So we say td course code dot inner html. It's going to be equals to course code the value. same thing is applicable to this one. cd unit load dot inner html is equals to unit load the value. For the grade, cd grade dot inner html, the value is going to be, to get the value which is being selected by the user, we say grade dot options. Then in square brackets we say grade dot the selected index, which is what the user selected, and what we want is the text, not the value, because it's the text will be saving actually. So when this is done, we want to append these 3 columns to the table row, and it's being appended in the order which is being added. So we say table row dot append child. The first one we're going to append is the course code. Then we append the second one, which is going to be the unit load. Then we append the last one, which is going to be the td grade. Then after this, we need to append this table row to the table body. So first of all, we need to get hold of the element. So let's copy this one. It's going to be, let's call it t body, and the element with the id t body. See the element here. When we created this table, we gave the t body of id t body, say t body dot append child. We want to append the row which we just created, and after that the table is hidden by default. So let's call this table with id table. So say table dot class list dot remove. We want to remove the class which we gave it earlier that made it to be hidden. So we want to remove the class display none. So let's try this out and see how it goes. Let's add a value. Let's say EC201 unit load 2, then grade, let's say select A, click add. As you can see, is the value is being added here. So let's say for example add 211 and unit load is still 2, and let's say B and add. It's being added again, it's being appended to the table body. And we have an issue here. When the add button is clicked, the value here still remains. So what I want to do is, when the add button is clicked, this should be refreshed. The value here should be set to empty. So let's go ahead and do that. So after this, we'll say course code dot value. We need to set it to an empty string. Same with the unit load of value. We set it to an empty string. Then the grade, the selected index, you need to set it to 0, because if you go to the select, the index starts from 0. This one is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you want to set it to the index of grade, which should be the default value that should be showing. So let's try it out. So that's why I set the selected index to 0. So let's try it out. Okay, enter a course code again. Let's say ECE 201. Again, unit load, let's say 3. Grade C. Click add. Let's call this calculate GP, and the ID is calculate GP. Then this one is clear. Let's set it to clear, and the ID is clear. So let's copy this, paste. So say calculate GP dot remove class display none, same with the clear. So let's try it out again. Add. As you can see, the button is showing. So the next thing we have to do is to hook up an event for this button and this button. So we'll start with the calculate GP. If you're enjoying this video, take some few seconds and hit the like button. It will enable me reach more audience, and also click on the subscribe button below. It will encourage me to upload more content. So let's continue with the video. So before I hook up the events for the calculate GP and the clear button, if you notice, if nothing is selected and I click the add button, it's actually adding to the table and nothing is selected, and we don't want that to happen. So we need to take care of this first before we start creating the events for these two. So we'll write an if else statement to check first if the course code dot value is equals to empty string, the unit load dot value is less than or equals to 0, because you can't have a unit load that is negative or any load that is 0. So we need to check if the unit load is less than or equals to 0. We need to check if the grade dot selected index is equals to 0. If this is true, we need to alert, else we put all this here. So before we clear the code and units load and the grade being selected, we need to store it in an array. Let GP array equals an empty array. Before we clear the value, we need to push the value to the array. We say GP array dot push. What push does is to add whatever value inside it at the end of the array. So we want to push in an object. So the first one, I'll give the key unit load, and the value is going to be unit load dot value, and the second one is going to be the grade. Let's call it grade, and the value is going to be whatever the user selects. So Let's copy this one. But this time, instead of the text, we want to store the value. We'll bring this one back to the so let's try the first condition. We'll put in the first course EC 201 and try to add. You get the alert again because the unit load is empty, so let's give it a unit load of 2 and try to add again. We get a validation check because no grade is selected, so let's select the first one and add. Yeah, it's working. For the calculate GP, you need to set in an event listener for the button. So we say calculate GP dot add event listener. It's going to be a click event, and it takes in a callback function which we are going to set to an arrow function. Let's declare some variables. We'll call the first one unit loads because it will hold the value of the total unit loads in the array. So let's say unit loads. Set the value equals to 0. Then the second one, we want to get the product of the unit load and the grade. Set that to 0. Then the last one, we want to get the sum of products of unit loads and grades. So let's copy this one. And say sum. And set it equals to 0. So with this being set up, you want to look through the array created. The array holds an object which holds the value of the unit load and the grade. So start by saying GP array. Use a for each. Let's call the parameter result arrow function. So first of all, we are going to store the value of the total unit loads in this variable, and we declare this variable outside so that we can access the value of these unit loads outside this code block. So we'll say unit load is plus equals to, then inside this result we are going to access the unit load. So we say result dot unit load, and by default the value of this is going to be a string, so we need to convert it to an integer, and JavaScript has a function called parseInt, so we're going to wrap this in a parseInt method. So the second one is the product of unit load and grades. So let's say product of unit load and grade is going to be equals to, let's copy this one, and this is going to be product of unit load multiplied by, let's paste this here, product of unit load multiplied by grade. So the product of unit load and grade is going to be the product of the unit load and the grade. The next one is going to be sum of product of unit loads and grade, which is sum of product of unit load and grade is going to be the sum of product of unit load and grade, like that. Next, we need to create a table row with 2 columns. So let's create a variable, call it tr equals to dot create elements, which is going to be tr table row, and it will have 2 columns. So the total unit load is going to hold the value of the total unit load. So the content of this is going to be the total unit load. So cd total unit load is going inner html is going to be, for this we are going to make use of what is called template literal. A backtick is located below your escape key. It was introduced in the ES6. So in this we say your total unit load, a dollar symbol, then curly braces. Inside these curly braces we can write JavaScript. Then inside these curly braces we want to print the unit loads. In the GPA column we want to print the GP. Your GPA is, and for us to get the GPA, for us to calculate the GPA, is going to be the sum of product of the unit load and the grades divided by the total unit load. When we are looping through the array, we store the total unit load in this variable called unit loads, which is going to be the total unit load the user enters, and the product of the unit load and the grade for each iteration is going to be stored in this product of unit loads and grades, and the sum is going to be the dollar sign, curly braces, then open a bracket, and the formula for the GPA is going to be sum of product of unit load and grade over the total unit load. So we say sum of product of unit load and grade divided by the unit load, total unit load. Then we want to, because we're going to have a fraction, so we want to set it to 2 decimal places. We use a JavaScript inbuilt function called to fixed, and it's going to be 2 decimal places. We put 2. We need to append this to the table row. To append the table row to the table footer. So let's go up here and grab the elements. Let's copy this one. Paste. We change this to table footer, table foot. So say table foot dot append child. Need to append the row tr. I've added some courses to this. So when I click on calculate GP, the table footer is being appended to the table, and this one prints your total unit load is 13, which is the sum of the unit loads here, and your GPA is 4.0. From the calculation, your GPA is 4.0. So what I need to correct is to make this GPA to span 2 columns. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's try it out again. It says your total unit load is 13 from the unit load I inserted, and your GP is 4.31, and now it now spans 2 columns. So the next thing we are going to look at is when the clear button is clicked. So first of all, let's grab the element with ID clear, which is going to be the button. We need to attach an event listener to this button. when the clear button is clicked, we need to empty the array. So we can do that by saying GP array, by setting it to an empty array like this. We need to remove everything that is in the table body. So say table t body dot query selector all, and loop through all. So we say for each, and it takes in a parameter and the callback function. Let's call the parameter child. Since we are going to write everything in one line, we don't need the curly braces. So we'll say child dot remove. We do the same for the table footer. We'll say tfoot dot query selector. But for the case of the table footer, it has only one element in it, only one child, so it's going to be tr. Need to hide the table, calculate GP, and the clear button. Let's copy this. So let's go ahead and try this in the browser. Let's first of all calculate the GP. The GP is total unit load is 13 and the GPA is 3.77. So when you click the clear button, everything is being wiped out. I've added some courses. So when I click on clear, when I click the clear, we get an error which says that the table footer is null, and because we haven't calculated the GP, there is no element in the table footer. So we need to take care of this in the code. So we need to wrap this in an if statement. We need to first check if the table footer has a child before we remove. If tfoot dot query selector tr, we need to check if it's not null. We need to check if it's not null. Then only then after that, if it's not null, we then remove it. Let's try it in the browser again. So let's click the clear button again. As you can see, no error is being thrown in the console and everything is wiped out. And another thing we need to fix is when this button is clicked, calculate GP is clicked, and let's say someone has a new course to this. Let's say EC 251, unit load 3, and grade, let's say B, and clicks add. When the calculate GP is clicked, this first one is still there. As you can see, the first one is still there, so we don't want that to happen. So let's correct the code. Let's copy this code and paste it here, and paste it here. So what this does is to check if the table footer already has a value. Then if the value is not null, it removes it before it appends a new row to the table footer. So let's confirm. So when I calculate a GP, it says your total unit load is 9 and your GPA is 4.22. Let's try and add a new course. So you can add as many courses as you like, and when you click the calculate GP, it gives you your GP based on the courses you added and the unit load. We have come to the end of this tutorial. If you haven't liked or subscribed to my channel, click the like button and subscribe to this channel. I'll be uploading projects built with JavaScript, Python and C# at least once a week. Stay tuned.